Ms. Sambuli, how can big data be used to ease the implementations of the Sustainable Development Goals?
So big data in their use of in the Sustainable Development Goals could be pretty interesting in easing the efficiency of processes that deliver services and goods to people. But for that to happen, of course, we need to have the data, and then the data has to be in a format that is actually open and transparent so that anybody anywhere can use it to understand or make something for themselves in their context and in their communities. So there is great promise on what big data could do for the Sustainable Development Goals, but there's a lot more work in better understanding the frameworks around which we understand what big data is, how it is collected, and what happens if big data in some contexts is not the most appropriate response. Maybe it's just small data in some contexts, because maybe 5 people out of poverty is better than no people out of poverty. How much data do you need for that, you know? So there are so many nuances, but there is quite a bit of promise there. It's just about how we understand how these technologies are going to be deployed or put in the hands of the people who not only are facing problems, but also know what could work for themselves in terms of the solutions. Yeah.
And how can the development of new technologies, such as AI, be made more inclusive?
Wow. Making new technologies more inclusive is first and foremost about people. So education and capacity for people anywhere in the world today to be able to say, yeah, I want to be able to use AI, maybe for a little idea or tinkering or to build the next big thing in the world. The idea of that is really centered around people and how people are educated and how resources already that lead to the creation of new technologies are in their hands. And also because right now the world as is, new technologies are mostly developed in certain parts of the world and then are deployed in other parts of the world. So how we can start trying to understand that that has to be more inclusive predates the conversation about inclusive technologies like AI. And the two in this crazy world have to go hand in hand. So it's really about understanding how can we create more opportunities for people to have capacities to use and appropriate technologies as much as be beneficiaries of them.
And what are the risks and the chances of AI in developing countries?
Ooh, the risks are huge because, again, as I was saying, with artificial intelligence and because you're feeding data into a series of algorithms or processes to produce an outcome, who gets to actually verify all of that? Who gets where the data is collected and in what format? How accountable and transparent those processes are is a huge risk to developing countries because most often than not, it is not people from those parts of the world who are actually at the helm of doing this. And even then, sometimes, even when you have the best of intentions in a local context, it could be misappropriated for even serious human rights abuses. So there are all these nuances about how society is and what the intrinsic motivation of any technology is. So getting people to understand that it's not just about having the perfect technology, it's also about understanding people and their motivations. That, I think, is an overall risk, whether we're talking about AI today or big data tomorrow or whatever else will be the flavor of the season next year. Yeah.
And Pius, you talked about developing a lateral view on digitization. Right. What do you mean by that?
So a lateral view for me, simply put, is really something around thinking about people and processes. And by that I mean people in their local context. We are diverse people in this world. What works for you and I here may not work for the next 2 people here, but we're trying to build something that works for all of us. To do that, we actually have to understand why what is good for you might harm me, or what was good for one community might be harmful for another, which is not typically how the world works. Also, in the world of technologies, they're not being introduced in contexts that are not, that don't have histories, that don't have complications. So take, for example, AI. To have AI used, say, if you introduced it in a university somewhere in Uganda or Kenya, where I'm from, you assume that there are people, if you set up a lab today, who are ready to be able to use these technologies. But what if they've not been educated properly? And maybe in this day and age we talk about miseducating people because they're taught just rote learning, but they've not been taught to be thinkers and to be creative. So if you're not thinking about that lateral view of how people have been educated, how people's rights are brought in, things like infrastructure and affordable access, and then what happens once we've had these resources. So the lateral view for me is where especially policymakers, like those who are gathered here at the Digital Summit, should be thinking about whether it's AI, whether it's blockchain, whether it's whatever new technology or old one, what are the common challenges that have always emerged? And it always almost goes back to how people, the infrastructure that is in place, and what needs to happen to actually address and fill those gaps along the way. Else we'll come back again for whatever conference and we'll say the same thing over and over again. But that's what really the lateral view is, how we understand what the common challenges and opportunities are so that we can work in a way that brings them all together for the public good.
And last but not least, could you tell me what you do in your research?
So I have been a researcher, but right now I look more into how all the research around new technologies can inform policy making, and especially in the global south. So I will look a lot at around, for instance, what are the barriers to affordable access to the internet? What are the challenges once people are connected to the internet insofar as there are risks as far as data, data leakages and all of that. So I broadly look at what affordable access means and what meaningful use of the web and new technologies means, and try and inform how governments, private sector and civil society actors come together to minimize the harms that technologies could bring and maximize the good that it can have for society.